Today on English Bites, we're off on a cattle drive. A cattle drive is when large groups of cattle are moved from one place to another. This takes a lot of people to help, all riding on horses. Because Australia is such a big country and has very large cattle farms, cattle drives have been a famous tradition since the arrival of Europeans. But Aboriginal Australians have played a very important role in the industry as well. We'll find out more as we join this 500-kilometre cattle drive.
Northwestern Queensland in midwinter, and the stock routes are busy as drovers bring their cattle south to market. But this particular cattle drive, covering nearly 500 kilometres from Julia Creek to Longreach, is by no means typical. The young stockmen, or ringers as they're commonly known, are all young Aborigines from some of the most disadvantaged communities in Australia, taking part in an ambitious program to tackle chronic unemployment.
There's probably a generation of people that are lost in the work area back out there, and you sort of got to try and grab it now before there's another generation lost.
This is one way to highlight not only the need for Indigenous people to be employed, but to show they are employable.
These teenagers and young men from the lower Gulf region have been getting up well before dawn to learn the disciplines of work and life on the road.
First couple of mornings is pretty slow. You start on about 4:30, you might get them up by 6, but then as the days go by, they get earlier and earlier.
What's it like getting out of your swag before dawn?
Not worth it, just laying around, just get straight up.
The ringers were nominated by the 3 Indigenous-owned cattle stations in the Gulf that also supplied the 1,200 steers for droving. 3 groups of 12 young men have spent a fortnight each on this epic drive. And indeed, as the herd made its way south, many pastoralists were impressed enough by the skills of these young apprentices to offer some of them a job.
Every station we've come to, they've said that they can't get blokes out in the bush anymore, they can't get ringers, And there was places along the route where said they'd put a few blokes on straight away.
What do you think you'll get out of this?
Probably motivate you more, like if you find a job somewhere else, get you up in the morning and stuff.
Zane Douglas impressed organisers so much, they asked him to stay on a further 2 weeks.
I suppose you could say that we're like a family, and they feel secure around us, and they come out and they see this country and the opportunities out a bit further than their boundaries.
It literally opens a whole new world for them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's one thing we're trying to push on to the boys, Don't think that your backyard's as far as you can go.
So the story is about a cattle drive. Cattle are cows and bulls farmed for their meat or milk. And a drive is when you move animals along. So on the cattle drive, they move cows and bulls on foot from one place to another. Here, the cattle drive was in northwestern Queensland, 500 kilometres from Julia Creek to Longreach. That's a long way to go. Who's taking the cattle?
Northwestern Queensland in midwinter, and the stock routes are busy as drovers bring their cattle south to market.
Drovers are bringing their cattle south to market. Drovers are people who drive cattle. They use stock routes. Stock are large farmed animals. Here the stock are cattle. Stock routes are the paths the cattle are driven along. The stock routes are busy as drovers take their cattle to market. They're going to sell the cattle at the Longreach markets. But what's unusual about this drive?
The young stockmen, or ringers as they're commonly known, are all young Aborigines from some of the most disadvantaged communities in Australia, taking part in an ambitious program to tackle chronic unemployment.
The stockmen, or ringers, are all young Aboriginal men from disadvantaged communities. Stockmen are men who look after stock, the animals on a farm. They live on stations, very large Australian farms where sheep or cattle are kept. The stockmen are also called ringers. The ringers on this cattle drive are all young Aboriginal men who are unemployed. It's giving them a chance to learn new skills and get some work experience.
The ringers were nominated by the 3 Indigenous-owned cattle stations in the Gulf that also supplied the 1,200 steers for droving.
The ringers were nominated or chosen by the 3 Indigenous-owned cattle stations in the Gulf. Indigenous-owned means owned by Aboriginal people. Until recently, most large cattle stations were owned by European Australians. They were on land that used to belong to local Aboriginal people before Europeans came to Australia. But there are 3 stations that are owned by Aboriginal people in the Gulf. The Gulf here means the Gulf of Carpentaria. It's the area of sea around Cape York. The area of land around the Gulf is known as the Gulf Country, and it's known for its many large cattle stations. Listen again.
The ringers were nominated by the 3 Indigenous-owned cattle stations in the Gulf that also supplied the 1,200 steers for droving.
The Indigenous-owned stations also supplied the 1,200 steers for droving. Steers are male cattle. There were 1,200 steers given by the 3 cattle stations for droving to be taken on a cattle drive. And how was it for the ringers?
Probably motivate you more, like if you find a job somewhere else, get you up in the morning and stuff.
Zane says it will motivate them more or encourage them, give them a reason to get up in the morning and work hard. And hopefully it'll help them to find work as well. And that's all for today. You can find out more about stations, drovers, ringers and stockmen on our website. I'm sure it will motivate you. English Bites is brought to you by Australia Network. And there are many other English language learning resources available at our website.